Good day. Welcome to the podcast. So you want to travel, you want to be free, you want to be a digital nomad. The RV, traveling by RV is the safest way to do that right now. Obviously, the coronavirus and everything else, you are totally away from everyone. However, there may be some strange encounters on your way.
And I look up and I'm like, there is a Santa Claus, like a 250-pound big man, Santa Claus,
Yeah.
drunkenly going up the ladder in my RV. And I'm like,
Wow.
get the hell off my RV. And I'm like, get off the roof. And the guy jumped down and
So we are speaking with Josh Boone from Pure Web Results. Josh is in Dayton, Ohio. That's in the USA. I was introduced by Joel Sierra Delgado. And Josh traveled and worked across the US, and that's in an RV for over 2 years. So this is going to be a lengthy podcast. I was going to shorten it, but I was listening to it and I thought, well, nah, I'm not going to shorten. This is too interesting. There's too much great advice. He talks about the pros, the cons. It's really, really good. So I did not want to make it any shorter. You can find all the links in the show notes. You can find it on our website. That's podcast with an S.earth. That's EARTH. So without further ado, here's the podcast with Josh in Dayton, Ohio. Okay, so I'm here with Josh Boone, and Josh Boone is the CEO and founder of Pure Web Results, and I believe you're in Dayton, Ohio, if I'm correct. Is that correct? Or?
yes, sir. Yeah.
Great to have you. Welcome on the podcast, I should say. Hey? And we spoke a little bit last week as well. Just little pre-talk, and I know a little bit what you've done. Obviously, 2 years in an RV around the States. That's amazing, I must say.
Yeah.
So what is it like at the moment in Dayton, Ohio? Obviously, COVID-19 and everything. You're not traveling around at the moment, eh?
No, I mean, honestly, things have kind of like stabilized here in Dayton. I mean, everyone's kind of gotten used to whatever this new normal is.
New normal.
So it's just like, people are wearing masks and everyone's generally pretty respectful of it. But I mean, everyone's, you gotta get on with your life. So it's like everyone's kind of, people are still going out to restaurants and bars are just socially distanced. And I mean, honestly, life for me personally hasn't really changed that much. The only difference is that I, instead of traveling full time, I used to travel quite a lot with my partner out, around the country and up in Canada with our clients. And, I used to do that a lot. Like last year I was in New York, Vegas, Austin, Vancouver several times, Chicago, the Keys, Florida as a whole. Like, I mean, we went all over,
all the way from Vancouver, all the way from Vancouver, all the way to the Keys. That's like opposite sides of the country, isn't it? It's far away from each other as you can go.
Yeah. So, really. I mean, we did a lot of traveling. So it's while, I'm not doing it full time anymore. I mean, my intention of having a home base again was never to be like, okay, I'm just here in Ohio, never traveling. But it was just, the thing with traveling full time is that is a full-time job. Like, people don't really realize, a lot of people that get into the digital nomad or whatever else, I blame a lot of this on the influencers, to be honest with you. They kind of paint a picture of what the life is like, and they don't really talk about the realities of even just planning your routes and timing. And if you're working remotely, like having reliable internet and everything else.
How did you do that? How did you do that with internet?
Yeah, I mean, like at one point I had it was actually made for truckers, but it was like this satellite cell phone booster, and I had a hotspot. So I think it was like, it increased the signal by like 40 times or something crazy like that. And you could just wire it directly in. And then they had the kind that would plug in with a cigarette lighter, but they weren't exactly cheap. They're like $400, but you can get cheaper ones. But I always buy quality stuff. So like, I just bought that, and that helped a lot, tremendously. But other than that, I mean, it's even with the boosting of the signal, it didn't always, it would boost the signal, but that doesn't always mean you're going to get 4G, great speeds. So that's the problem. Your email,
right?
Oh yeah. I mean, you can do the bare minimum, but if you're doing anything resource intensive, like let's say like you're a videographer or you do video editing, it's just like, ooh,
uploading that will take days, I suppose.
Oh yeah. So a lot of stuff like that they just don't really talk about. They don't really paint that picture. So it was just a full-time job doing that. And honestly, I really just kind of burnt out on it. So I really wanted to have a home base again. I
Hmm.
also really learned being on the road, like the value of having, friends and family,
Sure.
and being around that community. I mean, I kind of learned how to very quickly cultivate community anywhere I went, which was cool and a skill that I'm really glad that I earned. But it's different, like having people you grew up with, and there's just certain sort of safety, a feeling of like it doesn't really matter where I'm at. Like I could break down anywhere or have any problem if I'm within like 3 or 4 hours. Like I'm okay,
Hmm.
and that's something that like people don't really talk about, is like this low grade anxiety of like I'm traveling in the middle of nowhere. I had like really good RV insurance where they could come out and tow me, but like you might be sitting out there 4 or 5 hours waiting. So it's just like there's a lot of things where I don't know,
Did
like
that happen a lot?
having
Did you break down a lot, or
about 3 times.
three
Yeah.
times in 2 years? It's not that bad, is it?
No, no, it wasn't that bad. But one time, there was a, what was it? I think it was O'Reilly's or whatever. There's some sort of auto parts store that I bought. I don't remember, but there's some auto parts store here where I bought two replacement alternator belts, just a bunch of different belts and whatever else in case I had any problems.
Yeah.
And I'm in the middle of going from Dayton to New Orleans, which is about a 18 hour trip. Really depends on how fast you're going.
That's
I
also
had,
bottom of the country, right? Dayton is like Ohio is close to Canada, where New Orleans is like, almost Mexico, isn't it? So that's like
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
long way, isn't it?
completely.
Yeah.
Yeah, vertically, completely different
Vertically.
sides of the country.
Yeah.
So it was that was a long, long trip, and I was getting down there to meet a friend for a specific engagement, and I was just like, man, I got to get down there. And then yeah, my alternator belt went out, and I'm like, okay, well, this is kind of a pain, but I have a replacement. I'll be fine. So then I get the belt, and I start getting all my tools, like everything's set up and whatever else. And cop stopped by and was like, hey, is everything all right? And I was like, yeah, it's fine. I'm just placing this belt. It's probably gonna take me a while. I was like, all right, cool. Well, if you need, I'll circle back around in an hour if you have any problems, blah, blah. And I'm getting this, I get everything ready. And then I get the belt and I look at it, I take it out of
The wrong
the
belt.
box that I had in. It's the wrong belt, wrong belt. And I'm like, what the? I'm like, come on, man. And like the dude that was working at the shop, I remember I was having a 20-minute conversation with him about the RV and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
He knew I was traveling, and he got the wrong belt. And I was like, well, maybe you just gave me one. Nope, two wrong belts. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So I had to get towed with the RV
Yeah.
to some small town like 30 minutes away, because I was in the middle of nowhere.
Must have cost a lot of
And
money, or what?
well, thankfully my insurance covered all of it.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
So
Yeah,
that is
yeah,
why
yeah,
if you
yeah.
travel in an RV,
You have to have
highly
insurance.
recommend
Yeah.
you get the best RV insurance
Right.
possible,
Right.
and you always want roadside assistance. I had one person that said, "Oh, I don't need it," and then they actually had a breakdown and ended up being like, I got a quote. I asked the guy, he wasn't supposed to tell me, but I asked the guy how much it was, and he's like, "Well, the insurance company's paying like $1,600."
$1,600
Whoa, yeah,
for towing
yeah.
and the belt. That's a lot of money, man.
Yeah, so I had to get towed to this place, and that was the other thing though. Like people help you on the road. Like there was this shop, this local auto parts store, and they were closing,
Hmm.
and they were closing like 10 minutes. And one of the guys was a mechanic at a local shop, and he's just like, hey, like I got towed there, and basically he's like, hey man, like I'll help you put this on.
Hmm.
And it was like really chilly at the time, and like he went out there and like he just helped me put the thing on, because he was just trying to get me where I needed to go as quickly as possible. He brought all his tools and everything else, and
Yep.
it's just really cool. And I asked the guy, I'm like, man, I'll pay you. Like I tried to give him money, and he just like would not take it. And he's just like, go to New Orleans, man, have fun with your friend. I was just like,
Wow.
oh yeah,
Nice.
yeah. Yeah, I slipped some money in his toolbox when he wasn't looking.
Maybe you'll find it next year or so.
But it'll pay it forward. I just love that though. Like there's so many stories that I've had, just people helping you out and never asking for anything. So I think in these like polarized times where the social media, everyone's us versus them. It doesn't even matter if it's politics or it's this or it's that. Like everyone's so polarized, but really like on a human level, what I learned on the road is like most people are just good. They just want to, they're
You
really
believe
good
that?
people.
You really believe that? People
Yeah.
are just good?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so.
that's good. That's beautiful. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah. And you started your business, Pure Web Results. Obviously, I got this, was introduced to you by Joel Sierra Delgado.
Yeah.
And he mentioned to me that you started Pure Web Results before you left. So you must have been working while you were on the road. So basically, you're a digital nomad, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, the story, the long end of it is like I've been in digital for about 17 years now. Like I started when I was like 13 building websites. My dad had a tree service and I built a website for him. And then I got into SEO. I'm like, okay, how do I get people to go to this website? And
Sure.
it just blew up. And I'm like, wow. And then his small business friends started asking me to do it for them. Next thing I know, like I'm 13, 14, I'm freelancing, building small business websites and doing SEO. And then I started getting into paid marketing. And then I'm like, well, I'm going to build my own websites. And then that started costing me money. And I'm like,
Of course.
okay, how do I make money off of this? So then I started getting to affiliate marketing, e-commerce. Next thing I know, I've got a network of like e-commerce and affiliate sites. And I kind of burnt out on that. Like I'm a person that does something for like 2 to 4 years. And then I'm like, okay, next thing. So I kind of wanted to work more with those small businesses again. I started an agency,
Yep.
did that for about 3 years and then ended up merging with another local team. And, it was already going pretty well, but it just exploded from there. We had a team about 8 to 10 people. We have around 10 people or so.
Hmm.
We were just, won a bunch of awards, got to work on some really cool projects, but I was also working, 100+ hour weeks. I
Right.
developed an ulcer. I had a lot. I just didn't expect the business to scale and for it to get to that level where it's like, I'm like 23 years old and I'm like financially responsible for 8 other people and their
But that's
families.
what everyone wants when you start a business. That's the dream, isn't it? Or
It wasn't really what I intended. It just kind of
right.
happened. Originally, I kind of just wanted a lifestyle business and just kind of do whatever. And then it kind of grew. And then you get into this thing where you're like, grow, 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 and all these opportunities. And it was really exciting. And I think that's the thing. I think that's the commonality is a lot of people. It doesn't matter if it's traveling or it's starting a business or freelancing or
Hmm.
whatever. You think you want one thing and then you get it and you're like, oh, okay, grass ain't always greener. And for me, I realized that like I like working with a small team or even just by myself. And I didn't really want the responsibility of like it just dealing with that many people and that many projects. That's the big thing. It was the amount of projects, how spread thin you are.
Sure.
So yeah, that's one of the things. If you're thinking about getting into doing it on your own, I would really hesitate about starting any sort of agency or whatever else and kind of consider like, what is it that you really like doing? Do you just like working on the projects with people? Maybe you and maybe you have like an assistant or some people, partners that you work with.
Yep.
I'm a huge proponent. That's what we're kind of dabbling with now is this kind of collective partner model where it's like, okay, let's say you do web design or you're a copywriter,
Hmm.
partner with a web designer. You don't have to have a business together. You can be independent freelancers and just partner together, send each other business, work with someone that does SEO, work with someone that does paid digital, work with someone who does, branding or whatever else, and kind of have this kind of unofficial little network of people. And then you're tied. The thing is, if they're working independently, then they have their own clients that they're getting, they have their own stuff, and then as they start getting more work and you start getting more work, your tides all raise together. Whereas if you're a singular brand,
Hmm.
you're basically having to just be relying on one source of leads, one source of work, whatever else, and then you have to be financially responsible for all those people.
So it's
And
better
I
to
see so
collaborate,
many
is it?
people
Yeah.
just crash and burn that way
Yeah.
and really burn out. And so anyway, it just wasn't really what I wanted to do. I really wanted to travel. And like, it's just the way how we were so focused on the local town that we were in, because it was a Rust Belt town that,
What does that mean? What
GM
does that
had
mean? Rust Belt Town? What is that?
Rust Belt's kind of a term here in the States to talk about the area around like Detroit, like Michigan,
Okay.
and some of these other towns that were heavy manufacturing towns. And then all the manufacturing jobs
Went
kind of went
away. Yeah.
overseas. They got
Yeah.
outsourced, and they call it Rust Belt because it's just this string of manufacturing towns in that kind of Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan kind of area,
Hmm.
West Virginia as well. West Virginia gets rusted. They have huge issues there. They kind of get left out of the conversation a lot, but Pennsylvania as well, Pittsburgh, and really they really were hurting, and that was kind of what was happening in our town. But it was starting to come back right when our agency was kind of blowing up, and we were very involved in this kind of resurgence. And
Hmm.
so like I felt like because of how localized, even though we were working with some international brands, like how localized we were, like me traveling a week here, a lot of things were happening. So it's like I would be so out of the loop, and I'm just like it just made, and also like I just wanted to have time for myself, honestly. So I
Yeah.
kind of just exited the business. I just decided like I don't want to do this anymore after a lot of soul searching, and a lot of it was inspired by honestly Bowie and Bourdain. Um, which maybe I can get into later, but I ended up deciding to leave. I sold my portion of the business, sold everything that I had, bought an RV, and just traveled for 2 years. And I largely took those 2 years off. But I did do some consulting when I was on the road because I wanted to test.
Is that pure web results, the consulting part of it? Because it's an agency as well, isn't it? So you went from one agency to another agency. It's called the anti-agency.
Yeah, because like, even though it's an augmented form of the agency model, I frankly think the agency model is extremely broken for my own experience, and also over the last decade, like talking with countless other agency owners, consultancy owners, and clients. Every client has had a massive amount of horror stories with agencies. And I'm like, why is it? Because a lot of these people I know the teams, I know the founders, they're good people. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of straight up just snake oil salesmen and sociopaths that run agencies. I met a lot of them. But there's also a lot of really great people that mean well and really want to do good work. Yet they also, you get them 2, 3, 4, 5 years in, they start having a lot of these issues. And it's just a problem with the model itself. There's the issue of incentive. And I go down a rabbit hole talking about all the reasons why it doesn't necessarily work. But that was one of the things, is I had this hypothesis when I went on the road, and I'm like, I wanted to try consulting because I got to have more personal relationships. Because that was the thing with the agency, is like, you're spread thin. We were juggling like 50 clients.
50 clients all over the country as well. Yeah.
All over the world, even. A lot of them were in the Dayton area, but like all over the world. Like, we worked with a university in the Middle East. We worked with like all crazy, some really insane projects. And it was really interesting, and it was really cool. But like, when you're spread that thin, it's like, it's really hard to truly deep dive into the work. And I got so busy just managing the business itself that I really didn't get to be as involved in the actual creative as I wanted to be. And I'm a creative. So the consulting was cool because I'm like, I'm going to have a small handful of clients that I work with, and I'm going to have to develop really intimate relationships with them. I really got to almost be like an extension of their team. And I was talking to everybody: customer support, web developers, product designers. I was talking to everybody. And I got to go really deep, and I started seeing like, oh, whoa, there's so many layers here, so many layers of things. And I started seeing these systematic issues of like, okay, these issues start way down here in customer service or here in product design, and then they trickle up, and I'm dealing with it on the top level. But because we're trying to deal with it at the top level, it just keeps happening over and over again at the bottom. We have to create these positive feedback loops and stop that cycle. And that's really what's happened. So that's been super exciting. And so like, while we're kind of called the anti-agency by a lot of my clients, lovingly, I guess, is because we're not trying to be like an agency where you rely on us, where like you're outsourcing all the stuff. We come in, and I'm coming in as like almost like a virtual CMO, and you're working alongside the CEO and their CMO or whatever. I have an outside perspective. I can see things from the outside that they just can't see. Yeah. So I come in, and what I'm predominantly looking for is like, how can we solve those issues? And then what I do is help them come up with solutions internally. And what I've been trying to do is talk with other freelancers, consultants, agency owners, and be like, hey, can we kind of open source this a little bit?
Just make a network basically out of it, isn't it?
Yeah. It's been really cool.
Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, pretty much. It's kind of like unofficially just putting together kind of this little kind of network of people. Particularly, I see this in the digital nomad community. Everyone's very collaborative.
When you were traveling, obviously you traveled in an RV, 2 years you worked. Did you meet a lot of other people? Because obviously I saw an article as well. We'll comment that a little bit later, but might as well do it now. A lady who went away on a holiday in an RV, and she met no one. She only talked to her son. So You say you met quite a few people via dating apps. You mentioned last time that we spoke, or?
Yeah, I kind of jokingly say I tendered across America. I was single. I'm also polyamorous, so I kind of believe in me personally. I don't say other people do this, but monogamy isn't necessarily for me. I ethical, open, kind of non-monogamous relationship. So like, to me, I'm just like, hey, like I'm gonna just kind of go around. And I wasn't using, everyone, I think a lot of people think of Tinder as like a hookup app, but honestly, Tinder, because of the way it's structured, it makes it really easy to connect with people. And honestly, most of these sites, a lot of people don't know what they're looking for. So there's a couple things I'd say about Tinder. I think this is really crucial, even outside of Tinder, just talk about traveling in general. It's like, a lot of times when I'm traveling, I loved going to the small little towns. because it's interesting. They're kind of like isolated little communities, and they can be very weird and very unique. And there's also a lot of overlap.
Weird in
And
which way? Why weird? Come on, then.
Because like you kind of get these interesting little things that are culturally okay in one town,
Yeah.
and then you go to the next town and people are like, why are you doing that? Like, it's interesting. One town, like the people would literally serve, like almost like they do it in China and in Thailand. I've heard like they will serve their beer with ice in it. And this was just a thing that a couple of and I loved it personally, but this is something that several of the bars are doing.
I don't think I'll have that. No way.
It's not bad. If you get like a lager, like a really light lager, and you got like an ice cold mug with ice, it's actually pretty refreshing. But yeah, not for everybody. But it's interesting where like it was weird. Like this town, like it was kind of like a novelty. A couple of these bars, like old school bars that have been around for 60, 70 years, were doing it. It was just kind of a thing. But then those people grew up, and it kind of became this thing in this town. And I was even talking to people like 30, 40 miles away, and they're like, what the hell? What are you talking about? They didn't even know that was a thing, but it was just this little, it was like a little pocket of like 5 or 6 kind of old school bars where people just did that. And it was just kind of interesting. So it's just, there was just, you could apply that in a lot of different ways. There was just a lot of things that culturally were happening in these towns that like were really kind of weird and unique that you didn't really see other places. And I would also kind of attract the local weirdos, because I myself am very much so openly as weird as possible. Like, right. I'm like, that was literally one of the things on Tinder. I'd say, hey, we want to get a beer and talk about weird stuff or whatever. And people were just like, yeah. Or I would keep it really open-ended. Or sometimes people would say, it depends what kind of weird stuff. And generally I would say 4 out of 5 times I did not really, click with those people. Right. I usually clicked with the people that were super spontaneous. It's just like weird stuff. I like it. That sounds like an adventure. Okay, let's go. And so it's just like, there's this kind of just like, there were a lot of people that were on Tinder, and they either, didn't really know what they were looking for, or they weren't looking for anything in particular. And there were some people that were on there that were just, I'm looking for a relationship. I want to get married. I'm like, they usually wouldn't connect with me because they're like, hey, you're traveling. Like my profile picture was literally me and on top of the RV. Like it was I made it very obvious. That was the thing I would say is like, you're trying to meet up with people, be 120% up front with your expectations. There were some people that I would meet and they were traveling and they would try to like act like they were locals. And I'm like, that's the worst way of doing it, because you're starting off the relationship super insincere. And also, if you're just a local, you're one of 300-400 guys in this town or whatever that are on Tinder. If you're like the person that's traveling, yeah, maybe 1 out of 10 people might be interested in meeting you because maybe they're looking for something more long-term or whatever else. But that one person is going to be super into meeting up with you because they don't know how long you're going to be in town for.
How long were you there for? How long were you in a town like that? What is your average?
It depends. Sometimes it was a day. Sometimes it was a week. Sometimes it was a couple weeks. I didn't really have any real plans. Like sometimes I would make plans with people. Like I said, like the time in New Orleans, or like the first time I went to New Orleans, I was there for, kind of surprising a friend of mine for her birthday. And so like, that was, I wanted to be there by a specific day, but I didn't know how long I was going to be in New Orleans for. I figured I'd stay there for a week or two. I ended up staying 3-4 months. I stayed through Mardi Gras. It was like January when I went there. I ended up staying. I fell in love. And that was the coolness of it. There wasn't any sort of, it wasn't an agenda. I could just kind of do whatever.
Right. So what does it depend on if you stay somewhere or you move on?
I think a lot of it had to do with culture and connection. So it's just like, I do not care about seeing tourist stuff. Okay. I could care less about tourist stuff. I'm the kind of person that would go to Paris. I would like glance at the Eiffel Tower from a distance and be like, okay, I saw that. I'd have no interest. The only reason I would care about maybe going on the top of Eiffel Tower is just to see the view. But I would not care at all to be like, oh, I went to the Eiffel Tower, take an Instagram photo. I wouldn't do any of that.
You don't like influencers, hey? You don't like influencers.
Yeah, no, I don't at all. And I could get into that, man. I brought up, I think I brought up the Paris thing because you and I talked last conversation about this. I was down in New Orleans, and New Orleans is definitely a hot spot for travelers, people coming in for a trip or whatever else. And I met a lot of people, I would like post like, hey, I use the Digital-Nomad hashtag, and I would use New Orleans hashtag. So sometimes people would find me and there were other influencers and they'd be like, oh, hey, you're in New Orleans too. You seem really cool. Then, and they, or I would hit them up or vice versa. And like, we ended up like, hey, you want to go get a drink? And I'd be like, yeah. And I meet up with these influencers. And there's this one chick who said she went to like 30 something countries. I was like, wow, that must be really cool. Like, what's it like? Like, what's your favorite place? And she's like, well, I just got back from Paris. I was like, wow, okay. Like, what did you do in Paris? And I'm thinking about if I went to Paris, like I want to go to, like really good restaurants. I want to find like little hole in the wall places, like places that have existed for forever and have
I would just
really good
walk
food.
around
And
personally, but hey,
yeah, walk around, whatever. I just want to talk to people. And like, she's like, oh yeah, I went to, she's just naming off like all these famous places. And she's like, I went to the Eiffel Tower and this, and then I left. And I'm like, so you literally just hit all the Instagram spots, took your selfies and left? She's like, yeah, pretty much. And like, that's what she did. She was just a professional influencer, just went around, got all the Instagram stuff.
Good for her, but
Yeah, I mean, to each their own, but I'm just like, I feel like you could do that and then also have a lot of adventures in between. And there's also a lot of people that I met that maybe were traveling for the right reasons, but they were really fake on social media because they would act like they're one way. And there was this one person that like made themselves seem super adventurous.
Yep.
And then we met and I was like, man, we should go to Snake and Jake's. And they're like, what's Snake and Jake's? I'm like, oh, it's on the other side of town. It's just like, this is this house that's like almost dilapidating. Like Anthony Bourdain's been there, a bunch of stuff. It's like this amazing place. It's lit up entirely by red Christmas lights. And like, there's a dog there. It's just chilling and it's dim. It's awesome. It's super divey. I loved it. It was one of my favorite places I'd ever been to. And I showed them some photos and they're like, that looks pretty gnarly. Nah, I'm good. And I'm like, we should go to this place. And they just, any place that was even remotely sketchy, like they didn't want to go to. They didn't want to leave the French Quarter. They didn't want to do anything. And they just seemed really scared. And so, yeah, I'm not a big fan of influencers in general.
But you stayed in New Orleans for quite a while, for a couple of months or so. You basically, you just lived a life there, basically.
Yeah.
Just like
I lived there for 9 months and like, I off and on in between. But like, I stayed 3-4 months one time. And I spent like 3-4 months, like maybe 2 months another time, like a couple weeks here and there, a couple months here and there. I ended up staying like 9 months.
Why did you leave New Orleans again?
Adventure. I mean, there's a couple of reasons. I mean, the first time I left is because I was on the road and I was like, okay, now on to the next place.
Right, okay,
I stayed through Mardi Gras.
But still,
and I
3
felt
months
like
is a long time, eh?
Oh yeah, but I loved it. There was so much in New Orleans to adventure, and I was meeting all these really cool people, and I built a community there. And that's the thing. Like, I think it goes back to your original question, like why stay in a place for, a day or 3 months? Yeah. And like, to me, it was just like, okay, how much stuff is there to do that's weird and adventurous and new experiences? Like, so I'm a novelty addict. Like, is there anything new that I can learn or whatever? And the smaller the towns, the kind of the less there generally is of that. Not always, but in general. And then the other thing is like, is there a really cool community there that I can kind of tap into? And, what did I make? Almost like these touchstone people, like the kind of linchpins. Sometimes I would just meet people that are kind of linchpins in like certain communities, and they would introduce me to all the people. And basically, like, I would like within a week, like be able to go to bars, be like, oh, hey, Max, or oh, hey, Brenda, or whatever. Like, you just start meeting all these people because they would introduce you. Like, one person I met, she was a server in New Orleans, and like, she would just take me to all the bars and restaurants, and she knew all the servers, all the bartenders, all, everybody, because she was just in the industry. And like, and then I would go around, I'd see those people, and then like, I became friendly with them even outside the context of that. And then I'd meet people in the music scene. And, I make music myself, and a lot of my friends are musicians. My partner and our roommate are actually musicians that were in New Orleans, and they came up here with me. So it's like, I'm very much so got involved in a lot of that stuff. I love going to live shows, and I meet people there, and then they'd be like, oh, you got to go to this place. And so like, did I meet those people, and did I kind of have that community, and could I cultivate that pretty quickly? And if I did, then generally that would make it more interesting.
And then you stay longer basically in that place, right? If you find a community in a place, you stay. If you don't, you move on. Is that how it is?
Yeah, a lot of the time. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of variables, but I think if you boil it down, it's kind of that. There's certain towns I was in that seemed kind of cool, but like, I just couldn't connect with people. I didn't have that in. Like, a lot of times what I would do is I would find like really cool kind of coffee shops, like artisan coffee shops, kind of hipster kind of places, because I found those people to be really good resources. And so I would go up to I'd go there 2 or 3 times. I kind of, do whatever I was doing, whether I was working on projects or just coming up with logistics. I'd just sit with my laptop and just say, okay, where am I going next? And I'd research places or whatever, or I just do a lot of writing. I did a tremendous amount of writing on the road, just personal writing. And I would just kind of chill at coffee shop.
What is it, a diary, a book, notes? What is it?
A lot of things. I kind of did it pretty aimlessly. I was really kind of distilling down a lot of the lessons that I learned, both in, just business and on traveling and in general, because what ended up happening was I was having a lot of these conversations time and time again with people. I kind of became almost like a bar therapist. Like,
Excellent.
because when I was going into these small towns, like particularly the small towns, a lot of times they don't get a lot of new people. You know, sometimes I'm going to towns where the population is literally a couple thousand people.
Happy to see you. Yeah.
Yeah. And then also a lot of times, like, they just see the RV, particularly like, let's say it's a bar or a restaurant where they have windows that are facing forward, and the parking lot is right in front of it, and they see a big RV come flying up, and I come out of it. I got like a jean jacket, military boots on. They're like, who are you? And like, you know, and like, you know, people come up to me. And, you know, I was always, you know, I got to be really, you know, I learned how to, you know, just talk to people. I go up to the bartender and be, hey man, how you doing? And like, and they'd be like, I'm like, you know, what kind of stuff you got? And I'd be like, okay, I'll take a Miller Lite or whatever. That was the thing. I would always, if it was a place that, particularly conservative areas, really conservative areas,
like
I wouldn't
which are conservative?
In the United States, it's usually rural. Like in the United States, and I think this is pretty much everywhere, but particularly in the United States, more so than anything, if you look on a map, like just for example, the politics are just a good way of visualizing it. But if you look at the difference between like Democrats and Republicans, and you look at a map of where it's voting, the entire United States is just like red. And the only areas that are blue are super blue states on the coast or bigger cities. And so the biggest divide in the United States isn't really Democrat or Republican or whatever. It's rural and urban. And so when I would go to these rural areas, you know, people didn't really like a lot of change a lot of the time. And so I would come in and I would look around and see what everybody else is drinking. And I'm someone who drinks pretty much anything. I don't really care. So I was just going in there, and like, if I saw mostly people drinking like Miller Lights, Bud Light, you know, whatever else, some places like Rolling Rock and stuff like that, I'd be like, all right, I'll take a Miller Lite, I'll take a Bud Light or whatever. And then I kind of, particularly like if you don't know, like if they don't have like a you know, like cans or bottles on the back of the wall, or they don't have like obvious like a freezer or a fridge or something, or if they don't have like a stuff on tap, like if it's not super obvious what the options are, and I would just like ask for the most vanilla thing possible, like Bud Light, Miller Lite, whatever, and I'd have that drink, and then I would suss the room out. So I would always dress in a way that like could be kind of like, that's why I did the jean jacket, military boots, a white V-neck shirt, like a trucker hat or something like that. I would keep it simple where I could go into a super liberal town and they would be like, oh, okay, you're cool, you look like a hipster kid. Or I could go into a rural town and it'd be like, you look like, you know, jean jacket, white t-shirt, you look like, you know, you could have been a military kid or something. Like, so I was trying to not stand out too much, because what I wanted to do is any of those things got in the way. Like, I already stood out.
Did you ever feel unwelcome?
Sometimes, not very much. Sometimes, like there were certain times I would roll into a town and they were very kind of tribalistic, and they just didn't really like locals. Foreigners. I would say that predominantly tended to be small towns that were just outside of a medium-sized city that was going through a lot of growth. That is a commonality that I saw, because what they were seeing is gentrification. And they're like, we don't want, you know, maybe 15 years ago, they would have been totally cool. But now they're like, okay, you guys are coming in here. Now we got a bunch of people coming in and visiting our city. Like now we got all these people coming in here. Buying up our properties, kicking us out. We like a way that we grew up here. We like the way things are. Don't do it. So I think I think they were kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You know, they're kind of just looping me in with that. I didn't really take that very personal. And there were some areas that were like, I could tell it's like, hey, this is a bar for locals. Like, you might be cool. You might not. We don't care. Just please leave. Like, I got that vibe sometimes. There's also some biker bars that were like, they may or may not be like, you know, selling drugs and doing a lot of other stuff. And I think they were just like, we don't know you. You may or may not be a cop. Just get out of here. And I took the clue pretty quickly, you know? So I didn't really feel unsafe in a lot of those places. But I felt unwelcomed. And so I was just like, I'm not going to encourage, I'm not going to ask for problems. I'm not going to look for problems. Like,
if I may ask, do you think it's different for women traveling in an RV?
Yes.
Safety?
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, that's just an aspect of being a woman in modern society. It sucks. And I wish it wasn't that way.
Did you meet women traveling around like you did?
Yeah. Yeah, I did. I would say that the women that were traveling by themselves tended to be a lot like me, in the essence that they were just adventurous people, and they were really, there's two ways that it would be. They would either be really introverted, they would kind of like have like a cat or a pet or whatever, and they'd stay at like RV parks or whatever else,
Yep.
and they or campgrounds or whatever, or like maybe I didn't really spend a lot of time in the Pacific Northwest, where it seems like there's a lot of like BLM kind of huge state-owned properties where you can just kind of camp for free and whatever. I mostly was like in the South and the East Coast that doesn't really have a lot of that. There is some more than I think people think, but not nearly as much as on the West Coast here in the United States. But that tended to be that. But then there was also some women that I met that were kind of like me, that were just kind of like adventure pixies, that were just like, we're going to go on adventures and do whatever. And I think they relied heavily on their intuition and their ability to connect with people and make friends really quickly. And I think that kind of safety in numbers, like they could kind of make friends anywhere. If they weren't that way, I don't know. Like I it's hard for me to speak from a woman's perspective.
Sure,
but that's kind of my
but
my
you met
perspective.
him and you traveled that way, so I just thought just ask, because this is a big thing. RV, it's safe, you can meet people you want to, but you can also be on your own. And with COVID-19 and social distancing, this is a way to go. A lot of people have an RV, but just go, one tank away from home, really, so they can get back there. That's not what you did. How do you see that for the next future, Wesley? Because obviously with COVID-19, would you go again?
I would go again. Me personally, like I've kind of reached old man status where
Oh
I'm
man,
just
you're
kind of
30 years old or something, right? Come on.
Yeah, I know. I feel, man, I've lived a lot. I've lived a lot of life in a very short amount of time.
Right.
It's like I kind of say sometimes, like I feel like my life is a series of David Bowie characters where like I go really deep in one direction for a couple years and then I figure it out and I'm like, I could keep doing that. That's going well, but I want to do something else weird and just try something new. So I've lived a lot of different types of lives and I've just experienced a lot, and like I don't know if I would have the patience to do it like full time again.
But you got your RV, right? You still have it.
I still have it. I have it. I'm actually thinking about taking it out this weekend and just kind of going by myself. There's some camping areas that allow RVs, and it's kind of off the grid. There's no electric or any other stuff. They don't have like hookups or anything. Okay. They just have like areas where you can just park it, and that's that. It's free. So like I think I might go do that and just kind of go camping.
How did you do that? Because you didn't really go to campground, so you never had electricity or water. Solar, yeah.
Yeah, I had solar. I had 2 giant solar panels installed. We installed them. We had to put a whole new. We completely remodeled the entire thing. So I bought it, and
did you buy secondhand, new? How did you buy it?
Oh no, it's a 1987 Toyota Mini Cruiser. So it was one of those. It looks like a Toyota pickup truck.
Right.
It's 4-cylinder, 22 RE engine, hauling 6,500 pounds. It was great. It was awesome.
Wow.
Yeah, it was. I called it Mighty Mouse because like it was just very. People would like. I think sometimes it was so funny. Sometimes I'd be driving in the road and people would be very frustrated by how slow I was going, and then they would pass me. And as they're passing me, and they would look to my right, they would be like, I think they would expect like the big GMC, the big like van fronts, like the front of it, the cab, and they would see it's like an old school Toyota pickup truck, and they would be like, "Oh wow, okay," and they'd be like,
that's
"Sorry," because then they understood. Like that's why you're going so slow.
Yeah.
But it was all one thing. I mean, it was a real RV. Like you could go in the back through the cab and the whole thing. But I love them. They're actually there's actually communities just for Toyota. I think it's like ToyotaMotorhomes.org or something like that. There's whole communities of people that just have those Toyota motorhomes, and they're super fuel efficient. I mean, I got like 13 to 16. I would say like anywhere from 8 to 16 even miles per gallon, which is insane here. I mean, like most RVs, you're talking about like 4 to 10, maybe 12. I mean, so it really varied a lot. I mean, how much wind there was, it's straight, how, there was a lot of variables. But I was very surprised by how affordable it was. Small gas tank though, so I had to fill up a lot.
Do you plan for that? You planned your trips, right? You went to places where you actually asked around how to get to the next place, right? That's what you just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot. I mean, like my background is in search optimization, so like I know how to use Google really well, and like I just did a lot of searching, and I would always find the most scenic trips possible. I would try to find the scenic, weird. I'd try to go through small little towns, and I found, I forget what it was, but there was an RV podcast I was listening to, and I think they said like they would do a max of 400 miles a day. And that's about what I did. I did about a max of 400 miles a day. if I was going somewhere fast. I try to do less than that because if you go any faster than that, you're just grinding. Yeah, you just falling. And particularly in the RV that I had, I couldn't go any higher than 60, 65 miles an hour. I mean, I could go 70 if I really needed to, but man, it would push the engine hard. And I never had issues with performance with the RV. It was just speed. So like if you pushed it too hard, like as long as you were easy on it and you're respectful of the engine, I went up to Smoky Mountains in the thing. Right. Super, super steep. Even the truckers with huge rigs were going like 10 miles an hour with their hazards on. That was me. You just slow and steady and you'd be fine. But yeah, I mean, I had solar installed. One of my clients has a remodeling business, and like he helped me. He thought it was a really cool project because he's used to houses, like building houses and stuff. So you got to work on an RV, and I think he thought it was kind of cute. And then he started working on it. I was like, this is a cool problem to solve. It was like a unique problem for him because it's so small. So yeah, we put a new roof on it, remodeled the inside, we put solar in it, had a bunch of batteries installed. I really didn't hook up that much, honestly. I had a gas heater that didn't need electric that I would use in the winter if things got crazy. I had a shower in it. I didn't ever really use it, honestly. I think I used it once. Really? Never really used it.
You just did not shower, or?
No, I mean, I would just go to like gyms and stuff like that. Like I would just go across the country and just like, hey, $5 go into a gym. Did you ever
stay in a hotel while you were going around? A couple of times, maybe just, to have a nice
times. Mostly if I met somebody, I'm just like, hey, let's just get out of it. It was hot. I'm like, let's just get a hotel, or Airbnb or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. I traveled really adventurously. Like I would just park on the side. I just find neighborhoods or areas that seem cool that didn't seem like the RV would be in the way. I want to make this very clear. I did a lot of street parking and I did a lot of stuff. And I tried to be extremely respectful of neighborhoods and people's stuff. I wouldn't like leave the RV parked in the same spot for 3-4 days. I would try and move it around every day. I would try to not park in front of anybody's driveway. I tried to find spots that were really out of the way because I didn't want to perpetuate what a lot of people had negative stereotypes of people that were traveling. And people would see the RV and they'd be like, oh God, this is going to be a problem. And I always try to be I had like a laminated thing in the front window that actually had like a big smiley face on it. It was like, hey, like I'm kind of adventuring and like I'm, staying with friends in the neighborhood or whatever. Like you have any problems, here's my number, text me or call me. And it would just go to a forwarding, like a Google Voice number. So they wouldn't have my actual number.
That's good.
But it would text me or call me. And sometimes people would, they'd be like, hey, like you're kind of like, we're about to do some construction or whatever. So you're kind of in the way. And I'd be like, yeah, no problem. They'd be like, okay. And they were generally super cool about it. I did have one or two people that were kind of crazy and like, they wanted to like call the cops on me and do whatever. It's like, this is illegal. I'm like, actually, no, it's not. And like, whatever. But I would end up talking to some of the neighbors and they'd be like, yeah, that person's just kind of nuts. She calls on everybody or whatever.
Did anyone knock on your door in the middle of the night and say, hey, get the hell out of here?
Once or twice, but it wasn't really that bad. I did have I think the worst problem that I had was people that just weren't respectful of the RV itself. And it was mostly kids. So like when I was in New Orleans, I was staying with a friend. I parked in her driveway and she was right near Tulane, which is like kind of a party college down there in New Orleans. And a lot of people, send, rich parents send their kids to Tulane and, you've got, they go to New Orleans. And so like, they're just getting wasted all the time partying as is tradition in New Orleans, which is fine. But I remember I was there during Christmas time and there was a couple like kind of college bars down the road. And I was in the middle, it was probably 3 a.m. and I was kind of like just sleeping in the RV. And all of a sudden I feel and like the RV is shaking. And I kept my gun and my knife like next to my bed.
You told her the gun and the knife, yeah?
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah. So like I didn't get the gun because that was the thing to get real. I never had to get the gun. Thankfully, never had anything. But I did grab my knife, and
you do have
the knife. Oh yeah, just in case. I would never result to that if I didn't need to because I feel like you're just likely to accelerate unnecessarily. So, but I had my knife, and I bursted the door open because I could see through the rear. There was a window in the rear of the RV. With some blinds and I could see the shadows because there was a street light across the street. So I could see the shadows of somebody getting on top of the RV. I'm like, what is going on? So I burst the door, the back door open and I look up and I'm like, there is a Santa Claus, like a 250-pound big man, Santa Claus, drunkenly going up the ladder at my RV. And I'm like, get the hell off my RV. And I'm like, get off the roof. And the guy jumped down, and I looked to my left, and there's two like stumbling drunk elves that look like they saw a ghost, and they just turn around and run. Like, and then the Santa Claus is like, oh, I'm sorry, and he just like runs off. They were just a bunch of drunk college kids that just didn't think. I think they were probably like, oh, I'm gonna get on top of this RV, and I think they were just gonna take a
photographs or something. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but like people don't realize like those ladders and the roof, like they're not meant for people to be up there.
No.
And like I had just like a year prior redone the entire roof of that thing, and I'm like, oh my God. So like, that's my baby. And I was like, get off of that. People just don't realize those things.
Yeah.
That would be like someone just like trying to climb on your roof of your house for just no reason. Like, oh, I'm going to take a photo. Like you'd never do that. I don't know why people think it's okay to do it in an RV. Maybe it's just there, or I don't know. And I've had some other people mess around with it. And
well, at least you knew it was Christmas, right?
Yeah.
That's
so
good.
Like just some random guy in like June who like dressed up as Santa Claus. but yeah, I mean it ended up being all right. I actually think I saw one of the elves later, because a couple days later, my friend I was staying with, I was walking her dog, and I'm walking, and there's this guy with the same kind of build as him.
All right.
I couldn't really see because he's dressed in elf costume.
Put something else on in the meantime.
Yeah, but like I'm walking down the street with my friend's dog. And I just see this guy turn the corner, and he looks at me and does a double take. His eyes get wide. He just turns around, just walks away fast. I'm like, I think that was one of those elves. So he's just like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be recognized. But yeah, I don't know. I overall didn't really have a lot of problems. I got what I needed out of it. And one of the reasons why I got off the road and I wanted to have a base of operations again was because it was just like, it started feeling like Groundhog Day. And like, it didn't really matter where I was. Like I could be in the Keys, I could be in New Orleans, I could be, in Detroit, I could be in Chicago, all vastly different places. Those might as well be different countries.
Yeah.
And I started feeling like, okay, this place, this bar, this restaurant, even these people, like I felt like I was meeting like the same types of people. I was having the same types of conversations.
Yep.
Hey, this bar, this restaurant, it's kind of like this place and this place, but in the Keys.
You're getting blasé about it. Yeah.
I think I got what I needed out of this. I still want to travel. Absolutely. I still want to travel the world, but I don't think I need to do this full time, because I started feeling like I had a lot to teach people, and I wanted to have a mission. One of the things that really kind of woke me up, and this is what I would say, is if you're like traveling, you thinking about traveling full time or whatever, and you're kind of doing it because you're searching for something. What you're searching for, if you're anything like me and most of the people that I talk to, is like the answers are they're inside. They're with you. If you're going out and search for Valhalla, like you're not going to find it. And the thing that really woke me up, also right around that time, is when Bourdain passed away, and just thinking about, here's a guy who had been everywhere, done everything, accomplished whatever, and it was just like, I think he still kept searching, and he just didn't have anything else to search for, I guess. Yeah, so like, I don't know. I'm not trying to project on why he did what he did, but it just made me start thinking about it for myself. And, what, if I kept doing this for 5-6 years, where do I see myself? Like, and then I was down in the Keys for a second time. And the second time I was down in the Keys, I spent a lot of time in Key West and just talking with a lot of these retirees, people that had worked their entire lives to be able to retire in the Keys, which is not a cheap place.
No,
at all.
One of the most expensive places, right, in that area.
Yeah. So I would roll in there, and a lot of people were really confused. They're like, who are you? You like some sort of trust fund kid or what? And I'm like, no, I just traveled. I had a business and sold it, and I had enough to kind of, get this RV and travel for 2 years. And people would start opening up like, oh yeah, I had a business. Yeah, I went through a lot of the stuff, the burnout, whatever. And then you get a couple more drinks deep and you start having a pretty real conversation.
Sure.
And we would have those conversations, but then, I kind of go back. I liked finding like home bars, and I had 1 or 2 home bars that were in the Keys, and I started just seeing the same people there every single day. And then I started talking with those people, and they would tell me the same thing over and over again. It's like, I worked my entire life to get to where I'm at, and I honestly didn't prioritize my family, my friends. A lot of them want nothing to do with me, or they're a widow and their kids want nothing to do with them, whatever else. And they're just like, I got here because this was the destination. I wanted to be able to retire in the Keys. Here I am. And nothing.
They're
You know,
bored, basically like a piece
yeah,
of
they're
glass,
bored.
and then at a certain point,
They're just
away.
they're just killing time until
Until they
there is
pass
no more
away.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really unfortunate. And don't get me wrong, that's not the Keys as a whole. Like Keys was really cool. I met a lot of really cool people there. A lot of really cool people, but there was a lot of, there was a certain set of the population that was like that, and
the
it
Keys,
really,
particularly the Keys, or is that other places?
Florida
as
a whole, I would say.
Yeah.
But the Keys in particular, because the Keys is like an extreme version of it. I mean, the Keys is just like, the Keys is like the destination that if you didn't grow up there, like a lot of people want to go to that didn't grow up in Florida. Like they grew up in like Canada or like, New York or whatever. And it's like the Keys is like, it's it's literally the most southern point in the continental United States.
Nice climate, white beaches. Yeah.
Yeah. It's warm all year.
Yeah.
Like the coldest I think it gets is like 60 degrees, if that. Like it's like 70s most of the time minimum. So it's just like anyway, so like I just have those conversations and I'm just like, I need a purpose, and I really wanted to help people as much as I can. And that's where the kind of the consultancy came in, and working with these founders. And a lot of what we also do increasingly is working with these founders on kind of what I call like journey optimization. What I'm looking at is I'm potentially seeing some of these founders who are going through, they have this business and it's scaling really, really quickly. And basically it's growing so fast that sometimes they lose focus of what they're actually optimizing for, like why they even started the business to begin with. And when I talk with those founders, it's almost like I see like almost like a Obi-Wan Kenobi, like Force Ghost or whatever, like in Star Wars. I see like one of those people at the Keys. I see like them as an older person sitting in the Keys, and I'm like, I want to help steer them away from that.
All right.
I don't want them to
have
that.
Do they want that?
Here's the thing. A lot of times those people in the Keys didn't. What I'm getting at is like they weren't really totally aware of what was happening when it was happening. Yeah. They were so focused on their business that they had blinders on.
Yeah.
And like, I don't want these founders that I'm working with to get so darn down the rabbit hole of like optimizing for something that actually doesn't truly align with their long-term goals. And a lot of times these founders live in echo chambers where everyone's like scale, grow.
Yeah.
They don't have someone from the outside. I mean, I'm here in Ohio. I don't live in Silicon Valley or wherever else where there's all this pressure.
Sure,
like
Silicon Valley is even more.
So like I'm kind of an outsider and I have that distance and I'm like, hey, like, why are you doing what you're doing? And trying to reel people back in. And like, I wish I had somebody like that, like with the agency and all that stuff. Like when I started going grow or whatever, and I was working 110-hour weeks to kind of reel me back in and be like, hey, like maybe you should do this.
Sure. It's pretty much the American way though. Or am I wrong? Just being very, very successful. Don't worry about anything else. Just focus on your career, on your job, on your business, and make it. And then at the end, like you say, you might end up in the Keys, but isn't that what you're supposed to do?
Yeah, I think we're kind of sold this false dream of like, the American dream. And, it's just like the American dream was never a good dream to begin with, but at least it was something that most people could kind of maybe get, but you can't even get that anymore. Everyone's buried in student loans and everyone has all this debt. And, the amount of wealth inequality is rising and rising. Properties are going up. Rent is going up. Cost of living is going up. And I think people feel really demoralized. Like there's really no escape. And so when some of these founders, they're people that often I find a strong correlation between people that are founders and come from a traumatic upbringing. Strong correlation. Oh, yeah, because it's because of their traumatic upbringing and their coping mechanism is to basically get out of it.
Get out of that
do whatever
lifestyle.
they can. Yeah, and the thing is you come from a traumatic upbringing, whether that be emotional or financial or whatever, or both.
Yeah.
You have to fight significantly harder to get out of that hole. And so the people that rise out of that, they have these feedback loops, these coping mechanisms that are there to help you. And they're very good to have, and they get you out of that situation. But then once you have success, Tim Ferriss talks about this a lot, actually.
Yeah.
After he had success.
Only 4 hours a week, but hey.
Yeah, it just wouldn't stop. And it's like an engine. Elon Musk talks about this on Joe Rogan when he had that podcast and everyone freaked out. He smoked pot or whatever on Joe Rogan. But he talked about, he's like, my mind is like an explosion that never stops. He's like, you wouldn't very much like to be me and to have my brain. And like, I know on my own level, I can't say what he feels like, but I've dealt with that where it's like, I don't know how to turn it off. And all I see is opportunity and all I see is growth. And I've had to, it's like the bird of Hermes. Like I've had to clip my wings to like keep that. And I've had to learn how to put governors on myself. I've had to learn how to focus on myself and the people around me and optimize for a life that is healthy for me, rather than just give in to, you know, the intuition and the drive and the whatever, because that's kind of sexy, you know, like, oh, it's like the Social Network movie where they're just, you know, pounding Adderall and energy drinks. They're just working all night. And like, there's this kind of weird, at least in the United States, this kind of stupid idolization and romanticism with the people that are just workaholics, and they don't see. It's one of the reasons why I love Mad Men, because you would see Don Draper in a boardroom and just
great series. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and he was great. But then you would also see him as the alcoholic, like completely neglectful father, and it's like, that is reality, man.
Yeah,
like that is reality.
So what are you doing now? Are you happy? Are you content? What is it like now?
Yeah, I mean, I feel I am someone who is always striving for how can I do more, you know? But I'm trying to figure out how to do that within the context of also maintaining myself. So it's like there's always going to be that struggle.
More of
I grew
balance,
up in entrepreneurship. Huh?
More of a balance.
Yes, absolutely. Like I constantly see ideas and things. I if I could clone myself 1,000 times, I would start so many businesses and do so many things. I have so many ideas.
Yeah.
But the thing is what I've had to learn is like, ideas are great and you can have amazing ideas. It doesn't mean you have to execute on them.
Yeah. Well, that's what founders do, you know, they do one thing and 3 months later they want to do something else.
Yeah. And I've had to learn how to dial that back, because like one of the things that's been very insightful for me is Derek Sivers talked about how like he started a company called CD Baby when he was like 20, like somewhere around 20, like 18, whatever, doesn't matter. He was a musician. He didn't know how to code. He didn't know how to start a business. He didn't know anything. And he just learned all that stuff. And he built this service where basically you'd be able to self-publish your own, you have CDs printed and do whatever. Before that, you had to go through publishers, a whole big thing. He did that. And then he exited the business about a decade later. And he's like, okay, well, now I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to do whatever else. And what he was saying is like, a decade ago, I didn't even know how to code. I didn't know how to start a business. I was just a musician. Now, like I'm successful, all these things. I'm going to go start something else. And he's like, you could look at your life as a series of like 10-year sprints. And like, I tend to look at mine as a series of like 2-year sprints. Again, I'm like a 2 to 4 year person, because even if I do something for 4 years, I look back at like, okay, well, I'm gonna do this for 2 years, and then maybe I re-up for, no, I'm gonna subscribe for another 2 years.
So you're not someone who works in one place their whole life and then retires and dies, basically. That's not what you do, right?
No, and even if I'm like based here in my hometown, it's like I'm still constantly like, you know, I mean, COVID notwithstanding, like traveling. That's like I said, like last year, it's like I went to all across the United States and Canada.
Yep.
And like I foresee doing that again once, you know, things get a little less crazy.
You want to do it again at a certain point?
Oh yeah, I mean, I want to travel. I think I'll travel less.
Shorter periods of time. Would you do it differently? Did you start the last time we spoke? You said you can do more campground and stuff like that, right?
It depends on how I was going to travel. So if I was doing it by RV, yeah, I think I would do more campgrounds. I think I would try to find more rural campgrounds. I don't like the idea of being packed in like sardines in some RV park. Like that's depressing to me. Yeah. But I think I would try and find places that I could kind of just stay at for periods of time, and then, you know, have like places I could kind of Uber out to the towns or whatever, or like maybe I just get like a scooter or something like that. I don't know. Like, see, now it's like I've got a partner, we got a dog. It's like it's a lot more complicated. When it was just me, I could just kind of go off and do whatever. Not necessarily, but he's a Greyhound Shepherd mix, and he's a big boy. So, big RV. I probably would have to get a bigger RV. The RV now I got is like an 18-footer. I like the fact how small.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very small. Like I can fit it in a single parking spot, a normal parking spot most of the time. I liked it that way because it made it easier for me to kind of be incognito in the parking places. But yeah, if I was going to do it with my partner and like the dog and all that stuff, if we're taking a quick weekend trip or something, it's fine. But like if I'm going to be doing it full time, yeah, I'd probably have to upgrade it like a bigger Class C or like a Class A or something like that. And then you start getting into all the other stuff. And then I'm just thinking about how much time it takes. And I'm like, I would rather just take a week trip and go to a cabin or something like that, you know, or take 2 weeks off and go do whatever.
Or like
just
a holiday
fly out
next time around. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like, it's so much work. And I often found that like towards the end, at least, like the juice started to not be worth the squeeze personally. Like another thing that would be appealing to me is like renting out a house for like a month or two in a place and then going somewhere else and just being super transient. That would be something I would definitely be down for. I think a lot more than
Maybe you don't like the place. That's the problem. If you have an RV, you don't like it, you can just move on. If
yeah,
you rent a
but I
place
think I
for
would
a month, you have to stay there for a
probably
month.
scope out. I think I'd scope out the towns before I did that. You know, like I would take like a trip there, just rent like an Airbnb,
just to see if you like it or not.
Just see if I like it, and then I'd be like, okay, well, you know, in a month or two, we'll go do this or that or whatever. I don't know. Like I've gotten really good through the traveling of just being able to look at a place on Google Maps and just see the kind of places that are there and see the geography of the place.
See if you'll like
and
it
kind
or
of
not,
go on Reddit. And I got really, really good at sussing out if I felt like I would like the place or not. So I'm not really too worried about that anymore. That's just me personally. It would be hard for me to explain why, I guess, but there's just a lot of intuitions that I've had.
You've been there, you know, move on to the next thing, right?
Yeah. But there's so much. I mean, I'm really curious to see how things change. I mean, my hypothesis, this is something that I was thinking, particularly when I was down in the Keys, because like I came there a couple months after the big hurricane came through and just destroyed parts of it.
You were there.
What I saw, what I saw was like the more well-off Keys, because this, I mean, it's a series of islands that are just connected basically by like a 2-lane highway. And what I saw was the more rich Keys, if you will, they came back really quick. Where like after like 3-4 months after it happened, and like I went there, like you barely even noticed that anything happened. I mean, you see some trees that were like kind of messed up and uprooted and whatever, brushes. So I mean, there was evidence, but the houses themselves were fine because they were either in the process of being renovated or they'd already had it done. But then, or there was new development happening or whatever. But then, you know, you go to Big Pine Key, which was by far, it's like the Texas of the Keys. I mean, it's huge. And like, that's where a lot of the working class people were, the people that work in the bars and the restaurants or whatever. And maybe they inherited that house, multi-generational, whatever. You go through areas of that and it's like, it looked like New Orleans after Katrina. Like it's just like, there's still areas like in New Orleans where like, the houses are still just like messed up after all this time. And like, that's kind of what it looked like in the Keys, where it's just like, cause I went back a year later, just last year, actually, it was a little more than a year, but like about a year ago, I went back to visit one of my friends that lives down there. And, there's still areas of Big Pine Key where the houses are just messed up. And so I'm thinking about that in the Keys where the property values are like ridiculous. And even those areas, they haven't rebuilt or whatever. What's going to happen to all these coastal towns where they're not that well off? Oh, I mean, it's just not going to be economical. The property values aren't going to be worth anything as climate change happens, as sea levels start rising, hurricanes, tornadoes, all this stuff happens. And I'm really curious to see what happens. And frankly, like I start seeing, you know, what's happening with, you know, the camper vans and everything else. And like my hypothesis is that particularly, I think the COVID thing just astronomically increased this by, you know, 5, maybe even 10 years. I don't know. Like these are all lagging indicators. Like we're not really going to know for a while.
Year and a half. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, my hypothesis, what I've heard from several friends who are in the financial sector pretty high up and have a lot of data is we're not really going to be seeing a rebound until the end of next year.
End of next year, end of 2021. So that's starting in 2022 then, yeah?
Yeah, to the start of 2022 is when you're actually going to see like a real uptick, but it's going to start the end of next year.
That's pretty negative.
Like, I mean, that's just the reality. I mean, that's the thing. Like we've been holding off depression for a really long time here in the United States. We've been artificially pumping the market to keep it afloat. That's a whole nother conversation. But like chickens are coming home to roost in a lot of ways. And but how I see that affecting like people that are travelers and nomads is like, I think, you know, now like we've created this culture of location independence, everyone's zooming, doing whatever. Okay, so that's one factor. Now people are like, I don't want to be in LA. I don't want to be in Seattle or Portland. I don't want to be in New York anymore because it's so expensive. Why am I paying all this to be here and I can't even go out? And a lot of people are now, because they've been so addicted to going out and getting drinks and doing whatever, now that they haven't been able to do it, starting to realize perhaps that, maybe they're developing hobbies and doing whatever. And like a lot of people that I know that used to be traveling all the time and out all the time, super extroverts, they're just like, not everybody, of course, but some of them in particular that were really surprising to me. They're just like, I actually started, playing guitar. I started doing this. I started doing that. I actually really enjoy my alone time now. Or they're working on a side hustle, or they're doing whatever. And so you mix those two elements and people being like, I don't need to be here anymore. So now you're going to start having, I think there's going to be a huge sea change. And here in the United States, and I'm curious, I can only speak to the United States.
Everywhere, it's not just the States.
I think it's I think it's going to be everywhere. I can just speak to my own experience because I know the US well. But I think you're going to have this sea change from people going from the big cities to the more rural areas. And then that's only at the same time. Now you have the other factor of climate change, where particularly the South going to get really hot. The tornado, the tropical storms and hurricanes, have only increased for a couple of years. It's crazy. Yeah. And so as you start having that, those coastal towns, the southern Florida is just going to be gone. Like, it's made out of limestone. That's just like Swiss cheese. That's why Miami's having such problems right now. It was crazy when I was in Big Pine Key. There's this big nature preserve, and they talked about how they actually had a graph showing how, like, I forget, I don't quote me on it, but like you people could look it up, but it was like 1 million years ago, like all of the keys were like completely like one thing. And then 500,000 years ago, like it was all like kind of where it is now. Then 250,000 years ago, it was all underwater. And then it came back. It was some sort of thing like that, some sort of ebb and flow. And this is a normal thing that happens. Like most of Southern Florida and the Keys completely underwater. Some of it, like the Keys are almost like one thing, and they're not even islands. This is a normal thing. Whatever the climate change is, man-made or not, doesn't matter. It's happening. And like, we're not going to be able to get around it unless some sort of, Willy Wonka, Elon Musk comes and has some magical device or whatever. But I'm not, it is what it is. So I think what's going to happen is, ultimately, I think we'll survive, and I think we'll be fine. We're very resourceful creatures, and we always kind of find a way. But what I do see happening is like the coast continuing to become unattractive, even more so. You have all those things. Everyone's going to be going inland, and those property values are going to go up.
You really think so? Yeah? You really think so? Yeah.
Absolutely, 100%. There's nothing in my being that's. It's one of the reasons I came back here, frankly, because the Keys was one of the last places that I was before I came back here. I basically made my way up. I went to Orlando to see a friend. I went to Savannah, Georgia, and I went to Asheville, North Carolina. I kind of stopped at some places along the way, but that was just along the way. I went to the Keys and I'm like, okay, I'm going back home. And I went back to Ohio, and then I got back to Ohio. And I'm like, yeah, I need to have a base of operations here. I need to get property here. I need to get prepared.
So it was the Keys that made you go back.
In a way, yeah. It was just the timing, but it was those conversations with people, and it was seeing the physical, naturalistic effects of that and where things are going. Keys really opened my eyes. Talking to a lot of people down there about the realities of it. Like, it's interesting. People are like, yeah, I had this house for, my family's had this house for 3 generations, and they're just like, my kids probably aren't going to have it. And it's just really interesting having those conversations with people. So what I take out of that, and there is a positive to this, is that
it's coming.
I know it's coming.
It's coming.
But, okay, so what I see happening is property values are going to go up, and people are going to be more nomadic because they're going to be able to basically have the freedom to work online, work remote.
Sure.
People are going to be a lot less location.
You can learn online as well. They don't have to go to
learn
college.
Online. You can do whatever. There's 2 of my clients are in online education. So it's interesting seeing a lot of the statistics there. Yeah, it's booming.
It's booming.
So you see that happening. And I think that this culture is going to be very much so welcomed. And then you have that kind of like, hey, like you've got, maybe like rural kind of RV kind of part. One of the things that came to mind was like this idea of having these tiny houses, or like these areas where you create these kind of rural communities that are like tiny houses that you could rent, or that more or less are kind of in the rural areas, but they're segmented in a way where like people have privacy, like trees planted. There's a whole bunch of people that are doing these kind of developments that I've been talking to.
tinyhouses.com or something like that, right? I believe it's,
yeah. So there's just so much stuff happening, and I think we're going to have a much more nomadic friendly culture. And I think part of that is going to be, due to COVID. Some of it's going to be due to climate change. Some of it's going to be economical. I mean, if you're a business right now and you are predominantly based on having a huge stationary location, I mean, think about the insurance that you would have to pay, like even business insurance, all these things that like just the liability alone. Like these are things that most people are just not considering. Like the push for going fully online sustainably is like it's here, it's staying, and it's so I think it's going to be really cool. I'm definitely not getting rid of my RV, that's for sure. The only way I get rid of it is if I got a bigger one and whatever, but I'm definitely keeping it.
Businesses, they can save a lot of money that way as well. They can really scale down and office space and everything. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I've seen it here in London. There's businesses that say, well, no more office. You can just work from home. It's the same thing anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, what they're working on right now, I think even Elon Musk is working on this sort of global satellite-based internet, high-speed internet, where you can get it anywhere. I mean, that's all coming. So like once you have that,
isn't he doing like a satellite net somewhere, like like very dense, but same speed everywhere? Indeed, that's quite amazing, actually, isn't it? So you can work basically in the middle of Africa somewhere and have the same speed internet, so it doesn't really make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So I think it's just going to enable things. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity. And I would say, like, kind of in closing, like I would just say that if you're someone who's considering doing this and doing it, like really look into, maybe ask people that are influencers, if they'll be honest, or anyone that if there's all these communities online of people that are digital nomads or whatever, go on there and just kind of talk with people and ask about like, what's the hard parts of traveling, whatever else. Just kind of have an idea look on Reddit. There's a huge amount of people on Reddit on the nomad. They just put in like difficulties or like, hey, digital nomads, all it's cracked up or whatever. I'm not trying to persuade you from not doing it.
It's romantic. People want to do it. They think, hey, this is something that is really, really cool. It's really romantic. This is something that I really want to try. They don't want to know about the trouble that you might have.
But it's important to know that so that you can prepare yourself and have accurate representations. Because the last thing that you want, this is what happens a lot. I've talked to a lot of people that like want to get into digital nomad stuff. They talk to me about it, like, oh, you should talk to Josh or whatever. And one of the things when people go off and do it is if they decide that they don't want to do it anymore, or they want to land in a specific location, let's say after a year, they feel kind of weird because now they just labeled themselves a digital nomad. They just left their job and they left their place. And they left whatever and they did it. And they feel like, oh, I'm going to be a fraud or whatever. I'm going to feel embarrassed because a lot of times people are like, oh, you'll be back. You'll be back. And the thing is like, maybe you will be back and that's fine. What I would say is treat everything as a series of experiments. Say, hey, I'm going to try this for 6 months. I'm going to try this for a year. See if you like it. And just tell everybody that, hey, I'm going to try this for I'm going to try this for a little bit. Might be 6 months, might be a year. I'm just going to try it and see if I like it. Don't keep your expectations for yourself and for other people really like level and balance, because then if you do decide to come back, people are like, oh, okay, that's cool. Well, they went out there and they tried it. They said they were going to try it and it wasn't for them. That's cool. But when you label yourself like, I am a digital nomad, hashtag digital nomad,
you have to keep going.
And like, there's a lot of people that like keep doing, even some people that run some of those communities, they don't even do it anymore. Didn't even really like it, but they feel like it's almost like a business. That's not cool. It's like, again, ask yourself, what am I optimizing for? So I am totally a proponent of going off and having your weird Anthony Bourdain like adventures. Go do it. It was amazing for me. I don't regret it at all. There's not a single fire in my being. If I had to do it all over again, exactly the way I did it, I totally would. Like if I went back to 2016 Josh Boone, like when I first went off on the road, I would totally just do it exactly how I did it before. Because I needed to have that experience. I needed to want to change. I needed to want to have a home base again. Like I had to experience all that. And I think it would be really helpful for a lot of people. However, do know what you're getting yourself into so that you can prepare for it. But yeah, I mean, one thing that might be interesting for people is like every year I have like early January 10th for me for personal reasons. But I basically consider it almost like my death. And like, I just kind of say, hey, if I have a year left to live, like if I got diagnosed with cancer,
year or a day?
I have like a year, 1 year, like on that day, just pick a day. It could be any day. I personally would recommend like late December or like the first week of January for a couple of reasons.
After Christmas. Huh.
Yeah. Because what happens is that everybody is on holiday and the world just kind of shuts down and nobody's expecting anything. So you actually can take time off and just think. And I think that's a great time to do it. Also, everyone's already kind of in that mindset anyway, where, you know, they're doing New Year's resolutions. I think the resolutions thing's stupid personally. What I instead like to think about is like, ask myself, I don't think the resolutions work. It's like a task list. It doesn't usually work. What instead I would think about it is like, okay, I imagine I have a year left to live. What would I do? Am I happy doing what I'm doing now? Like, would I do it? What else do I do? What has been unsaid? What has been undone? And obviously, like, you don't take that to a crazy degree. Like, you go around and, you know, start like telling everybody your goodbyes and stuff.
Start killing people.
Yeah. but you just go full Dexter or something. Yeah, I mean, like it's not to that degree. Although I will say I do actually reconnect with some people I haven't talked to in a while, because I'm like, wow, I let that go. I let that relationship go a little bit, because you just get caught up in things. You're like, hey, I haven't talked to my buddy Steve in 3 months. What the hell? I love him. He's one of my favorite people. I need to talk to him. So that can happen. But what I get out of it is I ask myself that if I hear what would I do? And then I just say, what am I optimizing for in my life right now? And that changes. Even I took about a month off about halfway through December and halfway through January. I basically just took a month off. And I just did a lot of that, and we kind of pivoted the company again, where we started working more with like founders directly and a little less about the marketing thing. And like, also I decided like, hey, I'm going to start doing these podcasts and I'm going to start talking to people as an experiment. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to see if I enjoy this, because like one of the things is I feel like I need to share just personally what I got out of it as an example is like, I need to share some of these things that I've learned with people, because I would feel like I taught it's not an ego thing. It's just like, I've had some conversations with people.
It's good. You can help people, you know, it's very good. It's amazing. Yeah.
I've been able to like help just share some of my experiences. Like I've had to learn things the hard way a lot, but also what I try to do is look for what are people that have gone farther down the path earlier than me, and what's worked for them and what hasn't, you know? And that's why Bourdain was such a cautionary tale for me, because like I saw a lot of myself in him, you know, addiction and a lot of other things. I thankfully haven't had alcoholism or drug addiction. It is in my family, but I personally haven't dealt with it. However, I had a work addiction, and it stems from the same place. If you read like Dr. Gabor Mate and a lot of these psychologists on addiction, workaholism stems from the exact same place, or usually early childhood trauma, and it's a coping mechanism. So I have my own coping mechanism through just working. And that's, again, I don't mean to pry too much into his personal life, but I'm looking at him and I'm like, okay, well, having the ultimate job and having the ultimate thing and having all this success and being an international name, whatever I wanted to do, if I go to the most extreme version of it, is somebody like me like happy because of it? And the answer was like, no. Okay. And I saw that not just through Bourdain, but through other people as well. And so I'm like, okay, that's a dead end for me. I don't need to spend more time going down that path. And then I look at something like a David Bowie, who, he kind of had a similar workaholism, and then he had a stroke in the early 2000s while he was touring. It was like, oh, wow, okay, I got to stop. And that was the thing that woke him up, kind of like how the ulcer woke me up. And then he basically just became a stay-at-home dad. He had a second kid kind of late. And he just basically became a stay-at-home dad in New York until he had those last two albums. But he was basically a recluse for like a decade, not out of like any sort of, I don't want to talk to people, but just because he just wanted to do whatever the hell he wanted to do. And then he decided after a decade, like, I actually kind of want to work on some music again for me. Not because I want status or anything else. I just want to work on music for me. And he worked on those songs for a while, and then he recorded it. And then that last album, Black Star, which I think is the best thing he's ever done personally, he diagnosed with cancer. And he's like, I'm going to spend the rest of the last like 18 months of my life doing a musical, which he never got to do. He always wanted to do a musical, and he decided to do that for himself. And then he wrote this album that kind of like put it out to the world, which to me was like a big call to action. And I was just like, wow, man, that guy wanted life. Like, he made deaf art. And what's so crazy is he said in the 70s, that's what he wanted to do. He's like, I want to make my deaf art. And he did it. And I'm like, that dude wanted life. Like, he got to have all this success and all this stuff. And then he got to just be a stay-at-home dad.
He also could afford it, huh? He could afford it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. But what I'm just saying is like he pretty much in my like my perspective, I didn't know him personally, but I'm like that dude like wanted life as much as I compete from the outside. Like he lived on his terms, and I'm like that. That's kind of what that's a healthy template for me. So I think about that every day. Like, you know, hey, if I had a year left to live, like what would I do? And that just kind of keeps you. That becomes your guiding kind of North Star.
I think that's a very positive end note.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where can people find you?
Yeah, so you just check us out at purewebresults.com or go on LinkedIn.
Purewebresults.com. Yeah. Anywhere else? Or
yeah, you go on LinkedIn, look us up on there, or just Josh Boone. I think it's just linkedin.com/Josh Boone or whatever. If you just want to continue the conversation or anything you want to chat about, just give me a shout on there.
Brilliant.
So that's about it.
Brilliant. Let's do that. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
That was the podcast with Josh from Dayton, Ohio, from Pure Web Results. I'll put all the links in the show notes and on our website. You can find the latest news, obviously, on the website. It's podcast.earth. You have been listening to Peter de Vries. Thank you for doing so. Please don't forget to tune in next time as we're going to talk with climate care. Thank you.